Good day, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Today, we'll be discussing strategies on how to build and grow businesses. So we've all seen in the past 18 months now with the COVID-19 pandemic that we've had to rethink how we build our businesses, rethink how we grow our businesses. And we've had to dust off our strategies and look at how to develop strategies that are aligned to what the market really needs right now. So that's what we'll be discussing today. And with me today, I've got a panelist, LazolaBelle, from Epiphany Consulting. Lazola is the strategy guru, and I'm so confident that he really is going to add value to this topic this afternoon. And Lazola has worked in the corporate space for over 15 years. He's dealt with strategies and helped organizations build strategies over the past 10 years, and he's an entrepreneur himself. So we're really in good hands today. Welcome, Lazola.
Thank you very much, Busi, for having me. Really appreciate chatting to you. It is an important topic as well because, the simple idea of strategy is actually what's your plan. And during these times that we find ourselves in, we have to continuously revisit that plan and really prepare ourselves for an otherwise sort of time that is, it's unstable. It's an unstable environment. So let's put it like that. It's very difficult to really have a solid plan. All right. I'm quite involved in many things. I think one thing that I like to do for myself is to keep busy. And it sort of helps because sometimes in an environment like this, when you have to pivot, there's always something that was sort of low hanging that was there. So over and above Epiphany Consulting, which is the consulting firm where we do consulting on strategy for small businesses, but also bigger businesses around process, systems, and strategies, and people development as well, training. I think I've got quite a huge passion for training people. I think, if you can help someone build a level of competence, you've really done a huge service, not only to that person, but also to the environment at large. Obviously, I've got other interests. I chair the third corp one, where we have involved ourselves in the franchise space, in the food franchising. And I also started an investment club a couple of years back. So that's still sort of going. It's facing some challenges, but it's still there, and I'm an executive member there. So yeah, I'm quite busy during this time, and I think it helps in times like this. You don't want to idle too much. Having said that, you also want to spend time thinking because there's a lot of mental work that you must do in an environment such as the one we find ourselves in now.
It's interesting you say that we must spend time thinking because the natural reaction when you are in a crisis situation is to act, right? So we are so wired to act and react and do something. And when you're not doing something, you feel like, you're going to be overcome by the challenges that you're experiencing. So, what is your view? How does one, at this point where the business is not doing well, maybe cash flow is not great, they don't have enough clients, they're barely surviving, how would you suggest that they pause and think? What does that process look like of just stopping and thinking about how to move forward?
Look, I think, as you rightfully put it, it's very difficult to simply think when the house is burning. So you also have to act, and so it's a bit of a balancing act. You want to act with clarity and with caution, but you also want to know that there is potential in the actions that you're taking. So you've kind of seen an angle, a strategy, or a way to sort of pivot or to try and deal with the more glaring issues. So that's what you want to do. And so you have to balance how long you take to think and whether your actions are actually available, because sometimes actions themselves further waste resources that you're already running low on. So you have to teach yourself to think in small batches while you're acting, right? So give yourself a deliberate time to say, look, in the morning, I'm going to spend time reviewing this and thinking about what I'm going to do. But in the afternoons, it's action time where I'm going to be looking at talking to some clients, some potential clients, and doing some kind of action. So don't spend days and days thinking. The dangers of thinking, especially if you are operating a business alone, you don't have a business partner who can bounce ideas on, is you can very quickly get yourself in a position of anxiety. And the moment you're in the position of anxiety, then stress starts to creep in. And once you are stressed, you will tend to overthink. I normally say to people, 90% of the things that we stress about never happen, right? Because why? The brain is always working. So if you feed some anxiety, then it starts to create scenarios. And if you're already dire, then it just creates really bad scenarios. And then you're sitting there thinking about how bad it will be 10 years from now. And in fact, 10 years from now, half of the stuff you thought would happen will never happen. So it's really just trying to balance that kind of, I'm thinking about what I'm doing so that I'm deliberate, but I'm also making sure that I'm acting with intent. But I think just the last thing I want to say on this is that I think more than anything now, it's about streamlining. It's really about streamlining. You have to think about what is your cost structure to your business, and what costs can you do without, or what can you shave off. And the reason is so that you don't become a heavy business, especially while if you are what I call between invoices. So now you're trying to make business. You don't want to be sitting with a huge expense bill, as part of your business. That's the problem, and that's very difficult and sometimes sad, because one of the biggest or the costliest thing in your business would be human resources. And sometimes you have to let go of people and retrench. It's really hard. But if you want to save that business, you have to make sure it's lean and that it can weather this storm.
That's a lot to go through in this short period, because with COVID, things have to really escalate fast, right? There's no planning. There's no like, in 6 months' time, I think I might have to let go of this type of expense. Things really need to happen quite quickly. How do you act in that way in line still with your strategy? Because you've got a strategy in terms of how you want to grow your business. You've got a certain position in the market. You've got a certain value proposition. And you don't want to do away with that. So how do you align those type of actions to the strategy, or the core of the strategy that you have at the moment?
Look, I think the first thing we have to understand is that COVID this COVID period, rather, it's a lingering period. It is not going to go away very quickly. Now we are finishing our essentially second year of this very unpredictable period. It's going to go into 2022. Whether we will start to get a handle on it around vaccination and all of that, it's fundamentally changed a lot of economies. And therefore, it means it's changed where you operate as well. But more than anything, it's changed your business. It's changed your business structure. It's changed how you think about your business. So always think about growth as this sort of step-by-step continuous thing that perhaps is exponential. Where you want to think about growth now is in batches, in projects, right? And the reason I'm saying that is because you can sit and draw up the strategy, this 5-year strategy, and then you break it down to year on year, and then maybe within the year you break it down to the different quarters of the year. But depending on the kinds of business you're in, you're also subject to the environment you're around. One of the businesses that we're involved in is in the food space, right? Fast food space. And it's continuously disrupted by adjusted levels of lockdown and all these things. Every time the president speaks, something changes. And it's not only what changes in the business, even if it's not closed, if the other businesses around it are closed, have an impact. The complex where this business was in had a bottle store. So every time we closed alcohol, although we don't serve alcohol, it significantly reduces foot traffic. And when that foot traffic is gone, you have a problem where you had a strategy, and that strategy had some targets, and now it's not coming together. And so you have to think about your strategy in much shorter periods now that you can simply repeat continuously. So for example, if you have a solid 3-month strategy and you are able to implement it end to end in 3 months and it gives the results, all you do now is you extend for another 3 months, you extend for another 3 months, provided the environment has not dramatically changed. But I think one of the key things is actually to accept that there are some fundamentals in the environment that will never go back to where they used to be. That is a positive if we want it to be. It's a negative if we want to be dinosaur about how we approach strategy. Strategy is simply a plan, a way for us to exist in an otherwise environment that we find. And so the big advantage for small firms is that the bigger firms sometimes aren't able to pivot as quickly as a smaller firm. And so what tends to happen in the market now, and we've seen it in the food delivery, or not only food, but in delivery services in general, what tends to happen now in the market is either the small player, small entrepreneur can simply become significant over a shorter period of time, or the big player can turn around and look for a small player to buy their business or partner or their product, and therefore roll out. Case in point, if you remember, there was a company or an app called Bottles, which used to do alcohol deliveries pre-COVID. And then suddenly we've got COVID and delivery is a thing. Pick and Pay was nowhere near giving an offering for food delivery. And they then partnered with that company and ultimately bought it. And I think now they've rebranded that whole delivery service to Pick and Pay, whatever it is. But that's the opportunity that's in the market. I think similar thing with the partnership that Checkers and Zilzu sort of went into to then give us that delivery, 60-second or 60-minute delivery that Checkers has. So you have those opportunities. And so it means then whatever growth strategy you had 2 years ago, and it looked good, it might have been on a good path, it's completely disrupted. So if you hold on to it, you might not be doing yourself a service, but rather if you're small enough to be agile, to pivot, start thinking about shorter term strategies, firstly, that you can simply replicate every time you close off the period. But perhaps also think about strategy, not only for your business, but for your value chain, and collaborate with the other business in your value chain, because everyone gets disrupted, and it's a very difficult thing because when everyone is in this uncertain period, it can get ugly, because everyone is looking at incomes evaporate. And so this is what you have to think about, perhaps going forward around how long a strategy plan should be effectively.
And what you said around, firstly, accept that there's change in the market is so important. I've been having conversations with entrepreneurs, and people are at very different points. There are entrepreneurs who have accepted, and those who have accepted are now starting to adjust their strategies accordingly. And then there's entrepreneurs who are waiting for things to change and get better. We're saying, okay, well, let's wait it out. Once the pandemic is over, then we can get back to normal. So what you're saying is, essentially things have changed and a lot of things will not get back to normal. So how do you operate now with this current reality, and how do you create quicker strategies, that will result in quicker results?
But I think the first thing, just before I answer that, is the idea that the pandemic will be over is the first problem. The pandemic is not going to be over. We're not going to get to a time where there's this big announcement that says, oh, finally the pandemic is over. We're just going to gradually move on with our lives, right? With COVID as a distant memory of how it disrupted the world as how we know it. But we will never see a time where COVID leaves our vocabulary, because it's a virus that's always going to be there. What will simply happen over time, we will just handle it better, know more about it, and it becomes insignificant as a disruptor, but it will not go away. But in our fight, we're not going to get to a point that says, oh, the pandemic is over, things can shift back to normal. Instead, what will happen is that as everyone is trying to stay alive, new business models are going to emerge. And even if we get to a time where the environment that COVID had created, even if we get to that time where that environment now is no longer enforced by the impact of the virus, a lot of businesses won't want to go back to pre-COVID times. because you find that they are more leaner, they're more efficient, and they've learned new ways of doing things that they would have otherwise not have learned had they not be forced in those kind of situations. So it's very important for entrepreneurs to understand that there is no when the pandemic is over. There is now. What do you do now? And what are you learning now? And what are you finding that works? So one of the strategies that I think for now as entrepreneurs, because of the transitional period we are in, because we have to transition, we have to, it's not easy to just let go how you used to do things, because you're used to that. It's not easy to just adopt new things because they're new and you're not sure if they're going to work. And of course, some of the things you did before, some of them you want to keep, some of them you want to drop. So you are in this transitional period. And so you have to look at what is the most immediate challenge you have. So if it's a cash flow issue, solve that so that you can stay alive long enough to find the new sort of sweet spot or new business model, a new strategy for you to go forward. And so what I've seen, which it's becoming non-optional for an entrepreneur, especially if you are in a sector that is under pressure. I've one of the businesses we were pushing a lot pre-COVID was Haditi, which was in traveling and events. So that has been completely wiped out by COVID back last year in March. And to this day, we haven't made positive revenues. It's been really a cost center, a lot of sinking. But we looked at a different strategy around what it represents. So we know that's under threat. And then one of the other epiphanies in consulting. Now, consulting in itself has been quite lucrative because of the transition and the moving, but also one has to also think about the big clients where they are in their mindset, because it's also something that companies start to say, well, instead of outsourcing, especially this long-term consulting project, let's maybe build internal capacity, run a cheaper ship, and then run that over. And so there's certain things that might lose certain business, or or it might take longer to sign those deals, because businesses are starting to say, well, we know we need these consultants, but let's just spend a bit of time to understand exactly what kind of value we're getting for them. So sometimes getting that signature, it used to take you 2 months, now it's taking you 6 months. And in that 6 months, what's happening in terms of cash flow? So what I've looked at is to say, every entrepreneur, every business needs to develop or find a product to sell. And even if that product is simply part of your brand marketing. I'll make an example about Transformation Legacy. I saw you took some T-shirts and some masks, all of that you're selling. Now, that's not your core business, but having some skin in the selling game, in the products game, is an important one. Because at times when there's something that contracts the market, it's only things that people need, that people can buy, and products people can touch, that tend to be resilient. Whereas the more service-orientated kind of businesses, especially if they're not at the center of demand, can be very difficult for you to sell, because companies might say, well, I know we need your service, but we don't need it right now. So talk to us in 6 months. So what do you do in that 6 months, right? So I've looked at that and said, well, those that were already in product sales continue to do well. And even if it's not a basic need product, like I see there's a huge uptake in the sneaker game with Drip and Batu and Tava, Vaya, and all the sneaker brands. And you can see that because they are tangible and they're appealing to people's emotions, then consumers are still lapping those up. That's where the thinking should go as well, just to secure that cash flow, or to keep the lights on, because you have to get something to keep the lights on while you are pivoting, while you are looking for a strategy that works for you, while you are engaging your future clients. Unfortunately, there's no one easy way to say, here's a strategy that works, because it's dependent on businesses, it's dependent on the type of individuals driving that business, it's dependent on sector, it's dependent on all these things. And so we're all forced to pivot. And so the problem is sometimes when you're pivoting, do you have enough runway to keep the lights alive? And it's very tough, because one of the food businesses we're in were to close, because really it was not breaking even, and it was piling on cost. And there was just not enough runway to keep it going. A different food business out in East Rand, we had to pivot it quite dramatically and actually move it away from core business being we sell food to actually we sell alcohol, right? And then, because alcohol sales is still a product that people enjoy and still a product that people can relate to. Whereas when it comes to food, yes, we want food, but in a constrained market, in a constrained consumer market, people will tend to move to, I'd rather go buy uncooked goods and cook for myself to manage some of that cost. So there's a lot of thinking around that, but I think let's get into products. We don't have to manufacture them if we don't necessarily have that kind of capacity, but even if we resell, even if we broker, but let's get some products and then let's learn the art of selling. At the end of the day, entrepreneurship will always be about selling. And if we can get a product that keeps the lights on, I think that's a very good start to then pivoting and figuring out your next big game in around keeping your business alive.
So what would one need to think through as they build a strategy?
What makes a good strategy is the one that works. Okay? If it works and it brings money in, it's a fantastic strategy. And then if you can sustain it, even better, right? So maybe let me take a page from when I used to work in the IT space. So I studied computer engineering back in the day, and I spent a lot of time in the IT sector around software development lifecycle specifically. So I didn't necessarily code, but I was part of the software development phase. And so if you take the history of IT and software development in general, there is this methodology that is called waterfall, which is very methodical. So it starts off at initiation, and then goes to conceptualization, it goes to design, and then it goes to build, and then it goes to test, and then it goes to implement, and then it goes to maintain. And those are defined stages of this development life cycle. And they would typically, it worked, but it had to be fully resourced, and it took time, right? And big businesses now, when I last did work for the banks, they still sort of prefer it. Although there's newer methodologies like Agile and that are competing, at the core of it, you still have this this life cycle. I was doing a project recently with the mines, and they still sort of follow that model. And because it works, and if you have the time and you have the runway and you have the capacity, you run it, it's a surefire case because it puts accountability where it is. But then you come back to the modern age of app development, right? Now, if you want to develop an app and you spend, because the waterfall model is quite expensive, you spend all that money up front and then you spend the next 10 years recouping it back. Now, if you want to release an app, you can't spend 1 million rand on an app and then put it on the app store and kind of hope that someone will buy it. So you have to you get the first prototype out at the cheapest cost, and then you iteratively sort of build that app as you get feedback and as you get users using the app. It's the same thing with strategy now, right? So strategy used to be this sort of waterfall thing that we looked at it as a long-term view, whereas now we have to find strategies that are very iterative, right? So on the one part, we can, at the core of it, have this grand strategy that over 2 years, over 5 years, we want to achieve this. But the one that's going to have an impact, what's going to have an impact is your 1 month, your 3 month strategy that is iterative. And by iterative, I mean that you have to have a clear vision for this month, right? My vision for this month is to make sales amounting to 500,000, right? So where are those sales going to come from? What are my core missions, right? I'm going to be selling these products, and I need to be selling at this rate per day. And then I need to know at the end of each week, which is the result, if I'm on track. And then I set up that matrix. And then I continuously watch whether I'm hitting this matrix as I go on an ongoing basis. And every time I'm not, if the week I'm behind, significantly behind my target, I have to tweak something. And every time I tweak, I'm making note of what have I tweaked, what works, what doesn't work. And then I keep tweaking until I find a 3 month or month-long strategy that works. And then all I have to do is to keep cycling through that process. So it's very important now to really think about strategy as a very short-term kind of thing, because we have to find something that works. So my teachings are always to say, understand what you're trying to achieve, which is your vision, even if it's as short a period as a month, and then understand your result. How are you going to measure that vision? How do you know you've reached it? And then make that measurement a number. If it's an amount of money, then you know what you're chasing. If it's a market share percentage, then you know what. As long as you know how you're going to measure that you've reached that, and then from there you work out your strategy, because your strategy has to be informed by your resources, your capacity, and the result that you are trying to achieve. And so you put those down and say, right, this is going to be my strategy, and this is what each thing that I'm doing is how it's contributing to that result. And as long as you're getting that feedback that you are on track to reaching that, you have got a good strategy in your hand. If you're not, then you've got a strategy that needs to be tweaked, right? There is no perfect strategy. And like I say, when you go to business school, they will teach you these strategies. This is what you do. It's 5 quarters. This, and which is great. But at the core of it, when you are in the business, it's no time for theory. You apply all those teachings subliminally. What you are looking at is, I've got this result. If I have to make $500,000 by the end of the month, that means a week I must be grossing 250,000. Oh, not 200. Divide by you got that 85, 75,000, whatever the case. So if you're not meeting that, then you have to be doing something else. It means maybe you're not selling enough to enough people, or you don't. Whatever strategy you use to attract customers is not working. Maybe you're using social media and it's not reaching where it should be reaching. Maybe you need to employ a social media specialist to help you reach where you need to reach. Maybe in terms of the ratios of how many people do you sell to how many people are buying, you're not reaching, you're not talking to enough people. Maybe you're not explaining your product well enough. So you have to figure out what the reason is that you're not meeting that particular result. So I think in short, we have to set up strategies that are results oriented. Even better, if that result is how much money do I need to be making at this particular time selling this product or this service. And really we need to make it very simple. No fancy words, don't complicate it. This is a clear plan. So today I must do these actions and I'm expecting these returns. Then you can take stock and say, okay, those returns have come, so I'm onto something. Or okay, no, nothing has happened there, so that clearly doesn't work. So tomorrow I'm gonna try something else, and just keep a clear record of all these pivots, because in there is a strategy that works that you then have to take and repeat continuously to then drive that growth forward for your business.
Would you suggest that an entrepreneur gets a loan, to hold them up or tie them up for that period? What methods can they use to make sure that they've got the working capital they need to finance those strategies?
Any kind of funding that you get into your business, obviously understanding what kind of funding it is. If you take a loan, typically you have to have a clear income plan against that loan, because you have to pay it back, and you have to pay it back immediately. So it's not a very patient kind of sort of finance. And if you're unclear about how you're going to pay this loan, then you have to be careful, because it can be added stress in an otherwise failing business, right? Number two, when you get any kind of financing, you first have to really dig deep in yourself as an entrepreneur, dig deep in yourself into this business, and decide if you really believe in this business. Because ultimately, you have to take that risk. And so once you've gotten this income and this loan or this funding source, what it does then, it further increases your responsibilities on your business. And so you have to then make sure that whatever you're going to try, even if worst case scenario doesn't work, but it was really a genuine attempt, right, at resurrecting this business. Because ultimately, if it doesn't work out, then there's further repercussions, and especially now that you owe people or you owe institutions, and there's many other things that can happen. So get the loan, get a funding source to fund your pivot, but be very clear what that funding source is, understand it, so that you know the repercussions as well of taking that funding source should things not work out. I think what is also key is the working capital can also come in a form of relief. not necessarily in the form of money. So one of the things, as I alluded a bit earlier, is think about the value chain of your business. Who is your supplier? Who is your customer? And you look at your business. If you've got office space, who is your landlord? And everything else. You need to actually negotiate with these people ahead of time before things get bad to help or to arrive at a conclusion to say, guys, at the end of the day, we're all in this unpredictable environment. So when my business falls, you as a landlord, you have no tenant. And as it is, it's very difficult to find tenants. And so, let's look at an understanding or a model within here that allows us to take some pressure off, right? So, for example, landlord, if they really understand your pitch, could say, all right, let's reduce your rent by 20%. And now what they're saying there is, let's lift some pressure off you. It allows you to really go out there and make that money. And then when you make that money, in terms of that terms and agreement you have, you might then look at how you either pay back the 20% later or compensate the landlord in a different way. What it does for the landlord, it guarantees you further as a client. Instead of getting 100%, they're still getting some 80%, and they're keeping their space full. So if we're able to do things like that in support of our new strategies, that is huge, because remember, everyone is uncertain. So it's really a question of how do we think about our businesses within ecosystems? What is really your ecosystem of your business? If you have to be in office, that landlord is very, very important to keep a good working relationship. If you're dealing with a certain supplier of your goods that you then maybe beneficiate and send further, you need to keep that supplier close to make sure that you're in a position to negotiate and to negotiate terms when things are hard. If you've got big institutional customers, you need to stay close to them to ensure that we've got clarity as to, what is at stake and how much is not in your control and how much is in your control. And that could also be a form of working capital that is actually not coming in a form of cash, because the more reliefs you get, the more liquidity you can get to then finance your strategy going forward.
Which expenses would you say, or would you suggest entrepreneurs do not cut off as they streamline during this period? Which expenses would you say are necessary? And I'm asking that thinking, I've got an expense in mind where it's always a first go-to expense, like the marketing and advertising is always the first one to go, because anyway, a lot of entrepreneurs don't have that in their budget anyway. But the little that they have, they won't spend on marketing and advertising. So, I mean, what is your suggestion or thought on that?
A lot of entrepreneurs, anyway, you find that depending on the stage of business they're in, they aren't really having a budget for marketing and advertising. A lot of their business is the retain clients, word of mouth, and whatever works. But I think if you are in the kind of business that relies on visibility, you definitely don't want to let go of that expense. And the reason is because when the market is constrained as it is now, on the one hand, businesses are dying. On the other hand, the bathrooms are opening up. The business that stays in and stays visible ultimately will start collecting that revenue when the revenue comes back. And also, when you position yourself and you look resilient in an otherwise difficult trading condition, then you appear to be robust. And remember, the companies that are still at play now, whether it's big companies or SMMEs and entrepreneurial companies growing, they are looking for solid partners, right? And so they are looking for the people that are wavering the storm, that are staying in there. And so it's important to stay in there. Of course, not at all costs. You'll have to balance out the book. You might have to tone down the budget, depending on how much it is. But I would suggest it's not the first goal. Rather, look where else can you cut, and then keep that marketing going, and then see what you can do. So it's very difficult off the top to say this expense keep, this one don't keep, because it all depends on the business you are in and the type of industry you're in.
So if one is in a cleaning business, for instance, and they provide services to corporates or government institutions, but basically they're providing services at these buildings, where no one is present anymore. What would you suggest in terms of revising their strategy now that they can't provide those services? I mean, does that person go into a completely new business now, or how can they evolve their business, so that they can still generate income?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, depending on how much, again, runway the business has, they are obviously under serious pressure and they have to pivot. So what they pivot to will depend on what is low hanging on themselves. The first thing I would say, though, is that while a lot of high capacity buildings in the likes of Sentinel and all of that have been vacated, you still have a lot of buildings that are occupied or spaces that are occupied in certain sectors. For example, we've had last quarter GDP growth in South Africa was up 1.3%, and it's largely driven by mining and mining activity. You've got a huge drive coming from the warehouse and distribution sector, transportation sector, because we are now getting all this stuff delivered. So new warehouses are opening up, and so they need this kind of services. And not only big warehouses, but hub warehouses, inland, and etc. So that's an area that one could look at to say, right, if I'm not, in the buildings in Sandton, which areas or which sectors have this cleaning demand still, and what is happening there in terms of competition or access points. So that's one area to look at. The other area is that we have to also obviously really lead the market, because remember, even the big businesses are also sort of we have full faith in them, but they're also not sure where the market is going. So they need new innovative ideas. So I would say cleaning business needs to think about the fact that you've got these big buildings, even if they're empty, they still need to be maintained. Right? There's a huge ongoing maintenance, and some of that maintenance talks to cleaning, but it might talk to other things that business was not traditionally involving itself in, that they could start offering, that could bring ideas around what the corporate could procure in as far as they are concerned. So this is it's an ongoing kind of thing, but they obviously have to pivot, but they can first try and see if they can pivot slightly within sort of their sector. Other than that, maybe going completely in a different direction. But I think one of the key things is that the household sector as well. As much as people are not in the office, they're in their homes, and there's a lot of people who didn't have a huge demand for cleaning services at home, but now suddenly do because they're always at home, and some don't want to clean for themselves, or some they're just like busy. I mean, we're at home, but we're always working, and the kids are always at home. Even if you clean yourself, you're like, oh my gosh, I just need someone to help me here. So there's a huge sector. There's people that live alone in clusters and complexes. So there's quite an opportunity there as well to say, all right, if we're not cleaning the offices, maybe we can clean people's houses. Obviously, it's a different value proposition, maybe slightly different business model, but it's still within that the sector of cleaning services. So there's really looking around to see where's the business, where's the business, because it didn't disappear. Well, some have disappeared, but some have just shifted and they've hidden themselves from us because we no longer see them the way we used to see them, which is why in the beginning I said we have to accept that things have changed. And when we accept that, we let go of a singular view of what this business is, and we start to have new angles to say, okay, it could also be this, and there could also be a business opportunity over there and over there and over there. And so, yeah, so there is very hidden growth, but I think we need to be very creative, and we need to know that, unfortunately, in the game of business, no matter what happens, whether it's your fault or not, if your business has died, it's died, and there's no one to cry to, And of course, the government will keep saying there's relief funds, but we never really see them. So we have to go out there and you have to make it work.
Thank you so much, Lazola, for your time and for your insights this afternoon. It's really been valuable to really get perspective on how to build strategies that work for today. So thank you very much for joining us. And for everybody listening in today, yeah, first things first, accept that the market has changed, accept the current reality. And, you know, just it's important to also just build up your strategy in line with what the market needs now. So I hope you've gained insights from what Losala has shared this afternoon. And we wish you all the very best in surviving through this period so that you can get to a point where we are all thriving. Thank you.